noise and laughter, and there was plenty of that. So I just was good because my prejudices are being challenged, which is always a good thing. Okay, so just shout out your community treasures. What community treasures did you discover? Apart from Lindy hopping, which we all discovered already. Anyone?
Nesodden ingår.
Sorry?
Nesodden ingår, where I work.
Okay.
The skateboard park.
Skateboard park. Do you know? Any of you skateboard? Okay. So there's this, like, if I look at skateboard parks, you know, I don't know, in the UK, you know, or in the US or whatever, you know, I've got these weird trousers and the skate shoes, and it all looks a bit nerdy and aggressive, you know, and they're doing these tricks with the skateboard. But then one of my sons really got into skateboarding, and he says that the environment in skateboard parks for the people who attend is so friendly and so helpful. Like there's that what will happen is that the people who are good will help the people who are not so good, and it's all a really encouraging environment. And you could never tell that just from looking at it, but experiencing it from the inside, I think, is very, very different. And a skateboard park is definitely a community treasure for young people, for sure. Maybe old people as well. Not for me, I'm too old to skateboard. Where else?
The nature.
Nature, definitely. Absolutely. The connection with nature. Where else?
Volunteer central.
Volunteer centres. A place, so that comes back to the reciprocity that Bessel van der Kolk was talking about. And also, for those of you doing palliative care, you might look up a PhD by Libby Salno about a compassionate neighbour scheme that she ran. And one of the major themes that come out of it is that one of the really big reasons why people volunteer is because of the reciprocity. Because what they get back from volunteering. So definitely, what else? What we get other community treasures?
The library.
You're gonna have to, I'm a bit deaf.
The library.
Library. And the people, what happens in the library?
There's a cafe there and a lot of social.
There's a social
places.
thing, and are there groups that run from the library? Is it run as a community space? People nodding their head. Library. The libraries in the UK, it's like I can't help but fall into politics. When I just, it doesn't matter anymore because I don't belong to an institution, so I can swear as much as I like and fall into politics and that kind of stuff. In libraries, there's a tremendous amount of community stuff that goes on in libraries. They're really a community treasure. And what's happened in the UK is funding has been withdrawn from libraries. And it's typical of a completely ignorant Philistine government that they withdraw the community settings because in the UK we are beset by aristocracy and royal privilege, and our politics, our media, our businesses are blighted by people who've all been to the same public school and been to the same university, and they don't understand about social relationships, because the bit of the understanding about social relationships was excised from their brain when they were sent to public school at the age of 6. Public school in the UK means private school, and you have these horrible bullying institutions which forget about emotions and relationships, and it's no wonder that the UK is in the mess that it's in now. Libraries, public treasures, community spaces, social infrastructure, they're really important. Any others that spring to mind? That's a great example, libraries.
I think it's good
So small community is a treasure.
Yes, I think so.
I agree. People know each other. Absolutely. And it's easy for people to get lost in big cities, but you can still create communities in big cities. Okay, so now the place to start, particularly for clinicians, is to start thinking about where do these communities of belonging exist. And the place that is an enormous resource is the communities that we already belong to, of our family, friends and neighbours, and we're going to explore that. And we're going to explore about what those communities can do, and we'll do that for the next half hour, 40 minutes or something like that. When we come back from the next break, I'm going to get you all to come down the front so I can hear you better. Okay. So, hands up if you have ever been part of looking after a friend or a family member with a serious illness. Might be a terminal one, might just be a serious illness. Okay,
But what do you mean by taking care?
so we're going to explore that. Anyone, are all your grandparents alive? Okay. So that means you've been involved in looking after somebody with a serious illness, and we're going to explore how that happened, because this is the foundation of how we build what's meaningful, because that resource of the people who surround the person that you're talking to are a huge resource. With any kind of illness, and particularly with chronic illness, that's the primary common experience is fatigue. And fatigue stops social functioning because you don't have the energy to go out. And maybe also that with a serious illness, that you lose weight, and you lose your fitness, you lose your ability to do the things that you recognise yourself, such as earning a living or driving a car or cooking or cleaning or any of the things that we habitually do. And you can think that that combination of fatigue and isolation, that has a profound effect on our health and well-being, as we've already discovered. And what that means is that fatigue doesn't just affect the person with the illness, it affects the caring network of people who surround it. And I'm sure you're all familiar with when there's just one or two main carers, that in the context of in the terminal setting, it's easy for the carer to get exhausted. And in particular, that the nature of that experience is very similar to the experience undergone by the person with the illness, because they get fatigue, they have decreased social functioning, their lives may be radically interrupted. It's of course they're not dying, but there's a commonality of experience of that, and that social connectedness at the time of illness is something that is amenable to support. It happens with mental illness as well. It doesn't matter whether it's physical or mental. There is a common experience. There is one of the phrases that I've come across that I really like, comes from First Nations communities in Canada and Native Americans. And they talk about kinship and all my relations. And what they mean is that if they're talking about all my relations, they're not just talking about family members. They're talking about actually everyone in their community, and in fact every human being on the globe, and in fact not just the human beings but the animals, and not just the animals but the plants and the food we eat, the ground that we walk on, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. Because if you think about it, everything is interdependent. We are 100% dependent on interdependence. Everything we have, everything that's in this room, is because of interdependence. Even if you grew and cut and cooked all your food and all your clothing, you're still dependent on interdependence, because you're dependent on the earth, the sun, the water, the ground, the air. Everything is connected. And one of the things about that, if you think that everything is interdependent, it means that you have an action in one place, it has a ripple effect out everywhere, because everything is connected. And so, when you're thinking about illness, you're not labeling people as carers and somebody with the illness. Because if somebody is a carer, they're looking after the person that they love. And if you're a patient, or worse still, a client, you are still an equally valued member of that community. You have as much to offer as anyone else. And if you think that if you can see the interdependence of the people you're looking after, if you can see that network of relationships to people and place, it opens up huge potential. And we're going to examine it in our own lives now. So the way that human beings kind of structure their relationships is in inner and outer networks. And the inner networks are the people that we're really close to. If we were suffering from illness and fatigue, who would be the people that we would really want to maintain contact with? Who are the people who are dear to our hearts? So what you can do now is just spend 2 minutes just with the person who's next to you. Just count roughly how many people are in your inner network. So, away you go.
Ja, de som definerer som i det indre.
Kollegaer
De som ikke får en ordentlig helseproblem. Hvem det? Snakker med
kollega.
Det kommer veldig an på. Det kommer veldig an på problemstillinger. Hvis det er noe som er veldig vanskelig, så er det ikke så mange.
Jeg ser ikke for meg at jeg har en mann som driver sammen og ikke er ikke sånn, så vi er jo satt som katt. Og sånn, jeg skal ikke ha det sånn som meg.
Okay. How many people? just shout out. No judgment here. 2 is not better than 10. 10 is not better than 20. How many people? 5. And what? Who were those people? Not obviously not their names.
My parents, my sister, my boyfriend, and one close friend.
Okay, good. Who else? Shout out someone.
6.
6. Who were they?
It was my husband and my children and my sister.
Good. Who else? Shout out. Doesn't matter. No judgment. Anyone else? Come on, you all counted.
6.
8.
6.
8. Who were the 8?
9.
9. Who were they? Just shout out. Who are the people?
Parents, brother, sister, wife, children, 2 friends.
Great. Perfect. Okay. It's the quality of relationships that count. It's not the number, but the typical numbers could be 2, could be 10, could be 20 of people that you're close to, that you have regular contact with. Okay, now let's explore the outer network. And the outer network, just think about like friends and neighbours and just people in your community that you have friendship with or chat to. So I want you to count roughly how many. Again, another 2 minutes doing this. How many people?
Det begynner vi med.
Okay. Slight lull in the conversation. Noise level comes down a little. How many? Shout out again. 8. Good.
8 here too.
How many?
8 as well.
8. Okay. What about how many people regularly attend your Lindy Hop class?
20.
20.
Yeah.
Friendly with a proportion of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good. More than 8?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, okay. What about in your exercise class?
Around, or mostly 12.
12?
Yeah.
Okay. What about, are there regular shops that you go into and you chat to the people in the shops? Okay. You chat to the shopkeeper, maybe pharmacy, maybe, what about, any of you got dogs? No one got dogs? You got a dog? One person's got a dog. I can't believe it. There's something really wrong here. I'll tell you a story about dogs. If you look at the evolutionary migration of dogs, I know you've heard this already, but hear it again. You look at the evolutionary migration of dogs. They follow the evolutionary migration of human beings. We have evolved with dogs. If you don't like dogs, there's something wrong. Go and find a friendly dog. Because dogs are always, if you own a dog and you're nice with the dog, dogs are always happy to see you. Even if you're not as happy to see them, they're still happy to see you. Okay. What sort of dog is it?
It's a visual ness.
Is that a small, big dog?
It's a middle
And do you,
middle size.
walk your dog?
I wish I could say yes. But long story, haven't had the time
Okay.
so much, but before the pandemic, yes.
Before the pandemic.
Yes.
And did you meet other dog walkers?
Yes.
And did you chat to them?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, we lost that. I have to keep an eye on that. Sorry. Okay. Dog walking. Okay. Dog walking is you've got a lot of trails around here. Dog walking is a place where people meet up regularly. What about the sports clubs and the groups that you go to? Any of you go to the gym? Hands up if you go to the gym. Quite a few people go to the gym. Do you chat to people down there when you're at the gym? You don't chat to anyone. You just go down the gym. Okay, so you can, if you start to think about people that you have contact with and also people who you have friendly chats with, the numbers suddenly go up. And the numbers might get big now. You might have 8, 10, 80, 100 people in your community, people in your street, your neighbours. And when you start putting those things together and you start thinking about where your own treasures are in your community, bound in your relationships, you can see that there is an enormous resource that surrounds all of us. This interconnected web, where the ripples of our relationships spread out in the people that we know, even in the light social contact. And you think about how identity disappears in the context of illness and the context of caring. And you think about the resource that's available out there to build relationships, to build friendships. And you think, we know already that's the most powerful therapeutic tool we have. We are surrounded by this rich resource which we take for granted, but which we can use at a therapeutic level. And now let's have a think about when you were involved in being not as a professional, but just as a looking after a family member or a friend with a serious illness, what helped? What were the things that helped?
Talking.
Talking.
Caring.
Talking, excellent. What else?
Just being there.
Being there.
Being available, or just being in the same room, or
We're missing this on the film, but we'll put up with it. Okay, what else?
Eating food together.
Eating food together. And was that always with the person who was unwell, or was it eating food just with family and friends?
With all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
It's a bit like the family who care about the same person interact more.
Exactly.
Kind of, yeah.
Exactly.
Because
What else?
sometimes there are different things,
Yep.
difficult things we have. Like, it's important to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes this goes on, but we're thinking about good things.
Yeah.
Take responsibility
For?
for my mother.
Okay. And what did that responsibility involve?
Yeah, making sure she's okay, and it's a decent thing to do, and be decent.
Was it just you,
No, it was my brothers and everybody else.
your brothers, and their spouses, husbands and wives? And you shared it out amongst you? And how did that sharing out feel? How did that go?
It made the bond even better.
Made the bond. And I'm imagining that your mother died. No, I'm sorry your mother died. But the friendship and the bonds that you created during the caring for your mother, did they continue after your mother died?
Yes, the relationship to family has been stronger after several years.
Listen to this. This is so important. This is the main part of palliative care. All right, forget the symptom control. That's the main part of palliative care. That's what happened. What you don't hear in discussions about palliative care is the goodness that comes out of it. And that goodness starts before someone has died and continues into bereavement. It makes all the difference. And this is true of non-terminal illnesses as well. In fact, the separation between terminal and non-terminal is a fiction that we've made up. The separation between physical and mental illness is the same fiction. It's the same categorization and labeling that we do all the time. But there is a common bond and a common experience. What else helped? What else? You've talked about great stuff. You're excellent, because if I'm in a group of professionals in the UK and I'm talking about stuff like this, they go, oh, it was the nursing care. It was the doctors that came and administered to my mum. And they always default to the professional role as being the most important thing. But you've already automatically come up with the importance of relationships, which is the right order. But what else helped?
The possibility to be there. It was possible to stay there, and it was included. Yeah.
So what about the physical tasks of things that helped? The shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, doing the garden. Are you keen gardeners? Yeah, you like your garden?
I think it's important for the person who is sick also to see the surrounding of the family members getting closer, because it's nice for the one who is sick.
When my family and I looked after my mother who was dying at home, and then my stepfather afterwards, it was the happiest and most content I've ever seen them. To be surrounded by the love, laughter and friendship and care was incredibly nourishing for them. My mother had this thing, that's another, I can't help but talk about palliative care, but anyway. But palliative care all over the world, but in the UK, is obsessed with where people die rather than where people live and what living well means. And but nevertheless, we asked my mother when she came home from hospital about where did she want to die, and she said, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a problem. So I'd like to stay at home as long as I can, and I think I'd like to go to the hospice. And we went, that's fine. And then after a bit of time, I could see that my mother was really liking being at home and getting all the attention, and all that kind of stuff you can imagine. And so I said, well, you still want to die in the hospice? And she said, actually, I feel really comfortable here. I'd like to die at home. Which was fine, because we did that. But it was through exactly the thing that you're talking about, is the love, the care and the comfort that makes all the difference. And there are really helpful practical things as well which can help. Anyone drop a meal round or bake a cake and drop it round? Yeah. Somebody, we haven't got dogs. And it's really a shame, because it means nobody can come by and walk the dog, But looking after pets, and it includes personal care as well, but transport to and from hospital for appointments. And also, if you're looking after somebody, you need time yourself to be the human being that you are. So the love, laughter and friendship needs to take place on your own terms. So the love and support of friends, going out for a drink, doing normal things, going into your community groups, whatever they are, following your interests, doing the things that you recognise yourself through doing those things, they're really important too. Because remember, health, wellness is contained in relationships. And when you're thinking about how can you do something that everyone has access to build their relationships, because the relationships are the things that make the biggest difference to our health. You can do it by exploring the networks of relationships of the people that you're looking after, by exploring where the love, laughter and friendship exists, by recruiting people into that network to help look after the person that you're looking after as a health professional. In other words, this network of interdependence is the basis of our therapeutic tools. It is the basis of what we should be working with. There is a terrific document that's put together by Palliative Care Queensland, and it's called Yarning About Sad News and Sorry Business. And this document is a conversation with Aboriginal people of Torres Strait Islanders, because traditionally diverse communities don't access palliative care. It's some kind of madness that afflicts the palliative care world. But it's not, it's true of healthcare as a whole. I don't know what it's like in Norway, but certainly in the UK and the US, that healthcare is intimately tied with structural inequality. In other words, if you're female, if you have a different ethnic origin, if you look different, if you don't have a white skin, that your markers of health and well-being are less than the white male population. It's amazing. For women, have a later diagnosis of cancer, have less pain control and worse outcomes. It's amazing. Anyway, so Palliative Care Queensland thought, well, we need to find out more. So they had a conversation with the Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, and this document is brilliant, and it's well worth looking up, because we might think that those populations are riven by health inequality, and that if only they could be more like us, they would be better. But it's the other way around. What you find in Indigenous communities is an incredible sense of community. Somehow, these Indigenous communities are knowledge holders of interdependence. And the quotes from this book are really worth looking at. A failure to appreciate diversity and acknowledge complexities within communities condemns policies and programs to failure. Knowing the community is the best way to ensure the most effective method of consultation, which extends to more than geography, language or health statistics, to include consideration of politics, key stakeholders, other current and past engagement processes and topics, and other important issues taking place in the community. It is different in each community, and you just don't know if you're getting it right. As my friend and community builder Cormac Russell says, when you've seen one community, you've seen one community. You have to discover what's going on in all of the communities in which you live and work. it would be okay in my community, but if I went to another place and had to talk, I'd make sure that I talked to some other people quietly first, so I could work out what the people in the room expected or thought was okay. Don't think that individuals or organisation represent everyone. Talk to all people and the right people about the topic, the ones who are part of the topic and living it. There needs to be more of a focus on health and well-being combined, and look at how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do things when they die. You get these eyes of authority looking at how we do things when loved ones are dying. We need to get rid of this. So service providers are restricted in what they can do for our quality of life. It is up to volunteers and family members to help create this, which is a really interesting quote, because they know what quality of life is. In one of the quotes, they talk about when they know that somebody in their community is going to die, they swarm. The community swarm, and they surround the person with the illness and surround the family members in the way that we've been talking about. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to look at, I hope, and you can tell me whether we've managed to achieve this, I hope that we now have a sense of health being entirely interdependent on the relationships we have with people and place. Have we managed to explore that in a way that's visceral and meaningful? Because if it's not, you have to tell me. Are you looking at health in terms of disease, or are you looking at it in terms of relationships? Let's hear your thoughts. Do you habitually see health in terms of relationships? When somebody comes to consult you, what are you seeing? Are you seeing diagnosis, treatment, or are you seeing relationships? Talk to me.
Both, I think.
Say it again.
I think I see both.
Both.
Diagnosis and
Diagnosis and relationships.
relationships.
My guess is you wouldn't be here if you didn't see relationships.
I'm really interested in emotions, and like emotions is kind of underneath what we're talking about, because relationships kind of do something with the emotions we carry.
I think you would really like The Body Keeps a Score, if you like that, because if you're interested in emotions, because our emotional patterns are determined so much by our formative years, and the book looks at that in a really good way.
Relationships.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. It's good. No male GPs here. Where are they?
They're working.
They're working. That means you're not working. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Did your medical schools were mainly about disease rather than relationship? Yeah. What else? I bet you don't see disease in terms of India.
No,
You should do that.
but I think of it in terms of connection.
Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, connection. For sure. So what we're going to learn we've got 3 sessions that we're going to cover between now and 3 o'clock. And those 3 sessions is we're going to look at the structure of primary care and health services in the community, about how you can embed relationships into your routine clinical practice, because they are the most important thing for health and wellness. So that's enough of that. So I'm led to believe that your lunchtimes are early. Are we a bit early for it?
I guess lunch should be here within a couple of minutes.
5 minutes, maybe.
5 minutes. Is it too early? Because we can go straight into the next session.
It is. I mean, it is cold, but it is ready.
What would you prefer to do? Have a break or carry on?
Carry on for a bit more.
I have a question.
Go on.
Because, this period with COVID, we have been isolated in different ways, and in good and bad ways. And I wonder what you think about that situation.
Do you know, there's something amazing about COVID. And Steve Cole, who we saw, was able to show this. When he got interested in, he started off doing his research as a young man in, he actually did a psychology degree, but he was interested in science. And somebody came to him and said, why is it that men who had come out survived HIV better than men who hadn't come out? And he said, I was like, he's so great, Steve, because he's so normal. But he thought, it's a real kind of imaginative mind. So I thought, well, maybe it's stress, And so then he started to look at, well, what are the markers of stress? Well, let's look at norepinephrine levels. Okay. And let's apply norepinephrine onto some white blood cells and see what happens. And let's look at the inflammatory markers and look at the gene expression. And sure enough, he found that if people are feeling stress, their immune systems are hyperactive. That stress response, if you look at it from a kind of evolutionary perspective, okay, you're lonely, you'd be separated from your tribe, you're at risk of predation, it makes sense to activate your sympathetic nervous system and get active, sleep less, find your tribe. It's important that you have good immune function to stop bacterial infection if you've been bitten by a saber-toothed tiger or something worse, And what we also found was that your immune response to viruses is diminished. So social isolation and immune response to viruses are intimately connected, which is amazing in the context of the pandemic. It's amazing. And I think we all felt that when we were isolated. Having said that, you did really well. We were terrible in the UK. Our whole system is run by these buffoons who were separated from their mothers at the age of 6. Terrible. You've got a better system than that. No aristocracy. Definitely good. Okay, so it's a factor that you have to take into account. And the other thing is that, from a public health perspective, public health is so much more than just isolation or provision of immunisation. Because there are, again, it comes back to what we were saying before: community engagement, community development, prevention, harm reduction, early intervention. And that when you look at the major successful public health campaigns, they involve all of those things. And you can look at the history of control of major diseases. They have always included those components. You wouldn't dream of thinking about diabetes without management of lifestyle. And that's public health intervention. And that relates to a whole variety of different factors. But it's interesting that you've got a double whammy with the pandemic, with chronically stressed people combined with isolation, reducing our ability to resist viruses. Okay, this still comes back. Do you want lunch now, or should we carry on into the next session?
How long?
Yes.
Sorry?
How long would the next session?
A half hour, something like that?
It's okay. Go on.
Carry on?
Carry on.
Okay, I'm happy to carry on. Okay, So now let's look at the structural component of this, about how on earth do you implement this? How do you build this into the working practice of your daily lives? Well, the first thing is that this is a whole population intervention. That when we looked at that, it was really fascinating because in the UK there was a sense that if you just looked after the people who've got 3 or more chronic diseases, you're going to save the NHS. And it's rubbish. In fact, it's more buffoonery. And you can imagine who was sitting at the top of this chain of buffoons. And because even if you'd done the basic numbers, you would have realised that the number of people who are continually being admitted to hospital is much more than the number of people with 3 or more chronic diseases. And when we broke down who was it, when we looked at the demographics of the people, you know, at the beginning of a project and at the end of the data period we were looking at, we saw that there were a reduction in whole population emergency admissions in all age groups, including children, amazingly. And the point about this is that it's a whole population intervention. That loneliness and isolation, or lack of connectedness, or a lack of a sense of belonging affects all of us. And so what you're thinking about is an intervention outside of the GP practice, outside of health services, in the community, which goes across the whole population. And we dealt with a lot of that yesterday around the community side of it. But it's equally valid to a teenager as an elderly person. And you can think about, you know, the typical thing of teenage pregnancy that might be a reflection of some unhappiness that goes with risk-taking behaviour, that might be or some of the fuel is a loss of a sense of belonging, which might end up in further risk-taking behaviour, smoking, alcohol, drugs, which results in worse health outcomes, which might even end in suicide and death. And if you think about the principle of early intervention in that circumstance to a teenager, and you're able to solve the problem of the teenager through a community-based intervention, not only will you reduce the risk of poor outcomes for that person, that their whole life is altered, their whole life course is altered by that appropriateness of community intervention. So whole population is really important. This is not just about people with chronic diseases. It's everyone. And if you want to get the population changes that we showed you earlier, you have to apply this across the whole population. There's a whole bit about, any of you familiar with Institute of Healthcare Improvement, Quality Improvement Methodology? Is that something you've come across here? Okay, so what normally happens with healthcare change is somebody from on high, who is often a buffoon, to be honest. Not that I'm biased, but will say, we're going to do this, and then the health service goes hell for leather at this thing, because we have these things called key performance indicators, or keep people institutionalised. Where what you're doing is you're saying, we're doing this and we're going to count that you do this, and if you do this you're going to get rewarded, even if the thing that you're doing causes harm. And it might be harm that's done to you as a consequence of the build-up of paperwork. It might be the harm of focusing on particular interventions that don't make that much difference. And it might be the harm of ignoring more important things. So the IHI quality improvement methodology is a way of implementing change in which you do small-scale testing, in small-scale testing cycles. You try something, you see what impact that has. You have measurables to make sure that a change is an improvement. Because if a change is not an improvement, why are you doing it? And if you can't show it's an improvement, don't do it. It's straightforward. don't do it. Make sure that a change is an improvement and build continuous improvement. And the people who best understand how to make changes are the people who do the work. There is a great description of this principle, and it's subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means the distance between the people who are doing the work and the people who make decisions about that work. And the greater the distance between those two people, the worse the decision making is. I think we can all recognise that. We all can recognise we know what works. So why is the buffoons making these decisions which make our working life worse and makes outcomes worse? IHI quality improvement methodology is a participatory methodology which is embedded into the heart of working practice. So changes are designed by the people who do the work. It's really, really important because so much of the on-high changes have unintended consequences. So part of this is about, okay, we need to make this change from inside primary care. And you can think about it as being the same as hypertension. How do you treat somebody who's got high blood pressure? Well, you screen. You measure everyone's blood pressure. And nearly every person who walks through your GP practice at some point is going to have their blood pressure checked. And you measure the blood pressure, and the ones who've got high blood pressure, you investigate them to see whether you can find out whether there's a cause of high blood pressure or whether you have this idiotic term, idiopathic hypertension, which basically means I've got no idea what's causing this. Actually, we have some very good ideas about what causes it. It's a separate matter. But social relationships are related to that part. You know, your stress pathways, you know, all the things that Steve Cole was talking about, etc. And then you go, okay, and now we're going to treat this high blood pressure, so what you do is you give medication. And you might give some lifestyle advice as well. And then what you do is you look and see whether your treatment is working. So you bring people back to check and see whether their blood pressure has gone down until you feel like you're successfully achieving that little red bar in that diagram that we looked at earlier. But if you wanted to do what was really effective, you would assess social relationships as a routine on every patient in your practice. Doesn't need to be done every time. So how many of your patients do you assess their social relationships? Do you assess that diagram that we looked at before about the inner and outer networks without even mentioning the community networks? What percentage of your patients do you do that with? 0? 1? 10%?
No, I don't think it's 0, because when, for example, a patient comes in with depression, we always ask about the social network.
That's good.
Yes, because it's necessary to know if they are lonely, or maybe that's the cause of the depression, or
Yeah.
so when they have psychic problems, we do that, every one of us, I think.
That's good. That's good. But you can see the challenges about how you do this as a matter of routine. Do you have an electronic patient record? Okay. Do you have on that electronic record, do you have space for the assessment of social relationships? Okay, so it's there for you to use. What you have to figure out now is how do you build that into the working of your practice, and how do you use it in the context of when somebody comes in to see you? Do you look at it as a matter of routine? If you've got the space for it to be there on the clinical record, you think about, okay, who will do that assessment of the social relationships? So let's just play with some ideas now about how you So go on, who does those assessments?
I do them myself, and in the way primary care is built up in Norway, we have a fastlege, so I know all my patients
That's
very
good.
well.
That's good.
And when you've been working with them for a while, I think you get a very good picture of the people they have around them, because they either mention them or they're followed by them when they come. And I think when I get a new patient, half the time we speak is about how's your life.
That's good. And do you record that on the clinical record so that other people can see? That's good. Okay. And when somebody comes in to see you for whatever it is, do you look and check out what's happening with their social relationships? Do you look for change and see what's going on? Do you do it with every patient?
No.
Okay. So how would you do it with every patient? You know how to do it. How would you do it with every patient?
Then we have to have more time.
So, do you have to do it?
Well, we could transfer it to someone else.
Who else could do it?
Secretary, but they're very busy as well.
So you have to have
Or maybe the patient themselves, in a way, could.
What about, yeah? What else? What the other? Who else can do it? Who else has got the permission to look at social networks of
We do it in Cycle Health and Hjertevarmt.
Say that again.
We do it in our job, and that's what we do.
Okay. And do you put that on the clinical record so that everyone can see it? Does that mean the primary care doctors can see it?
No.
I don't think so.
But we send messages when necessary.
It's only for us to see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
it's
don't
only
send it.
they're separated.
Because
We gather all this information at NAV when someone approaches us for a benefit, but again, there's separate journal systems.
Separate, yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. So let me ask a different question. Could this process start with the receptionist when somebody comes in to see the GP? Could it be done? Do you have nurses who measure the blood pressure? No, you don't have. You don't work with nurses.
some offices do, but not here on Nesodden. I don't.
Okay. So
It
is it
exists in
just
some offices.
only doctors in the GP practice?
No, we have health secretaries, but yeah.
It's kind of we are the situation nowadays is that we are kind of pressed by time, both the secretaries and everyone. So to implement because it's a really good idea, but to implement it we need
Okay.
a person more or more time.
If you had more time, if you had a fewer number of people consulting you, then you would create space in able to be. Well, that's what this does. One of our primary outcome measures. We have 3 primary outcome measures for this project. The order of them depends on who we're talking to be honest. But if you're talking to clinicians, the first one is improved working lives. All right, through practicing medicine as we would want to practice it, it improves working lives. We're not left with the sense of failing to address the problems of the people that we're looking after. The second one is improved patient outcomes. In other words, people get healthier. Their lives are not blighted by chronic disease nearly as much. And the third one is reduced cost. When I showed you those charts, if you just count the cost of emergency admissions to hospital, we know that for every £10 you spend on this project, you save £60 solely through reduction in emergency admissions. That doesn't take into account the cost reduction from early intervention, from reducing healthcare reliance because people are happier and healthier. So what we're saying is that the way that medicine is practiced now is not the best medicine, and that what we're thinking about is changing the way that you practice medicine so that you can give the best treatment to people that you're looking after. And that means extra, at the beginning, extra investment. But you save money, you save huge amounts of money in the long term.
I think we all doctors want to do the best for the patient.
Absolutely.
But in Norway, it's a system like we are our own firm, mostly, and then we have costs for the health secretaries, the rent for the rooms we have, and everything, and because of that, we have to take so much patients to pay the costs, and if but some communities have like communities doctors, and they have doesn't have that time pressure. Thank you. So they, for example, I used to work in the helse sektoren. It's a healthcare center, and then I could take half an hour with every patient. I love that, but now as a fastlege, I can't do it.
So,
I just want to, because nowadays it's kind of, because we are kind of in a, because we have the systems, we have the, like we work as a GP, and we have like these, we have the same patients which we follow up year from year, but we are kind of in a situation which we are about, we might lose it. The system is kind of in a, and if we lose it, like, you should talk to the health minister.
right. So,
and implement it just to save, because we actually have what might work. And
I'm just going to take a slight detour now, because we're going to address this problem. Okay. How many of your patients have chronic diseases, or physical and mental health?
I don't know the amount of it, but
30%?
a whole lot.
30%? Something like that? How many, the percentage of your time you spend looking after people with chronic diseases?
Quite a lot.
Okay. Do all of those people go to groups for chronic disease management?
They should.
Okay. So, think about this. We think that, I tell you what, people need to exercise more, and they need to eat better. If they exercise more and they eat better, their health is going to improve. But what you're talking about is behaviour change. And you think that we've seen our diagram of the bar chart of the impact of social relationships compared to reducing obesity, giving up smoking, drinking. Social relationships, the bit in between, is more important than the thing that whether you're improving your diet or improving your exercise. In other words, if you look at that diagram and you look at the arrows of interconnections between all of those things, you have the opportunity to transform your chronic diseases by using social relationships as the major therapeutic tool. And what that means is that you can think about the opportunities that you might have through creating groups for chronic diseases. So, food and diet is a really good example as a way of thinking about it. So, if you think about food, what are the creative opportunities for relationships that go with food? Now, there is a small amount of information that you can give people about how to improve their diets, But for the most part, people know, we know what a healthy diet is. That's not rocket science. People would like to think it's rocket science, but it's not. And apologies to the dietitian in the room. It's relatively straightforward, but if you think food, what are the social relationship opportunities that go with food, then actually you think that I haven't just upset a dietitian, that you think that it's the moment that you choose a meal. I've just upset it. No, that's not. Just kidding. The moment that you cook a meal is you choose a menu. And you can sit down with a friend and choose a menu, or a partner, or your children. And then you can go shopping with them. And you can have a nice time when you're shopping. Because you can sit and have a cup of coffee and even a piece of cake, because you're building social relationships. So even if it's food, you know you're still doing something good. And then you can go home and you can cook the meal together. And then when you eat the meal, you can make sure that all the mobile phones are out of the room. And that the TV's not on and the computer's not on, and you light candles and create a nice environment. And then you wash up together. And even when you go shopping, you're thinking about the best places to buy food. And then you sit and you have a nice evening, or a nice lunch, or whatever it is. And you can see that you can use the food as a route into social relationships. And when you look at the other main areas of life where love, laughter and friendship can happen, all of those places are amenable to the social intervention of relationships. So Lindy hopping is a great example because you're doing exercise with other people. And if you're doing your exercise classes outside, or whatever form of movement that you do it in the context of relationships. And likewise, there are some really simple things that you can do for relationships to improve relationships. And likewise, in the environment in which you live, you can improve that, both the internal and external environment, by doing things together. Improving sleep through making your good sleeping environments really important. Getting rid of electronic devices. Making sure that your room is dark, that your rooms are not light. Making sure that you have a regular bedtime. These are things that you can do with other people. So relationships, food, community, mind. How on earth do you calm your mind down in the way that Bessel van der Kolk describes, so you have that feeling of safety and security? Because if you're traumatized, if you're chronically stressed, you're separated from yourself, your family, your friends and your community. And there are lots of things you can do with your mind, but you can do it with other people. So that you can think that if you're thinking about health, you can do it in groups. 10% of the population has got either diabetes or pre-diabetes. All of those people would be suited to join a group. And if you think about group consultation, if you think about that you can manage your chronic diseases through groups, that you can have 20 people together for a period of an hour, and that they meet regularly over a period of 3 months to 6 months, that their lives will be transformed by that experience, and that the group management will massively reduce the number of times that you see those people. And you can definitely build groups into your routine clinical practice. Every single person who has a chronic disease should have the opportunity to join a group. You can set up group consultations and group meetings for all of your patients, because the amount of medical information they need is small. What they really need is to how to solve the problems themselves amongst themselves, because they will figure it all out. They will figure out where it's what exercise is fun that they can do together. They'll figure out where to go shopping, how to cook a meal together. They'll figure out about what they can do about their environments together. And you can run courses like this, which might be for, you spend 2 weeks or a month on each of these things and the group works it out themselves. And everyone who has got a chronic disease becomes part of this, because the science shows that behaviour change is best done through social interaction. And you can transform your practice by using group consultations so that you have more time. So you then have to figure out, how do you run these groups within your practice? Much easier to do if you know all your patients. Because if you start setting up groups, or are there groups going on in the community where this stuff is going on, you can say to the person, you know, look, I really think it'd be a great idea if you join these other people, so that you can figure out about how to best manage your illness. So one of the key components about how you're going to improve working lives, how you're going to be able to have the time to have a half an hour to sit down with your patient because you really enjoy it, because you know that you can do all the things that make the biggest difference to people, which is the social relationships. One of the key infrastructures are groups. If you invest in groups, what it means is, in terms of charging, and you know, I've colleagues in the US who are doing this, who have a similar funding system. The funding system based on activity, which is nonsense, because the more activity you do, the more you get paid. So you're going to do more activity. It's utter nonsense. So why not do it through group consultations, where you can say people come into the practice and you're seeing them and you can figure out how to do that. You still get paid for it, but the bulk of the consultation is actually spent in the context of the group that's run through your practice. And you can think about other creative solutions that helps to free up time by giving people the things that's going to help them most of all. You have to figure that one out. But the solutions are there. You'll find how to manipulate the funding system in your favour to be able to get the better outcomes, so that you're more satisfied and your patients are more satisfied. Okay, so I think what we're going to do over lunch, right, you know how your health system works. So we'll take 45 minutes for lunch. And during that time, you're going to chat about how you think you could reorganise the way that your practice works based on what we've discussed without losing funding. You need to come up with solutions. I can suggest them, but only you know what the solutions are. And you have to think creatively about this. Think out of the box. Think about how can you manipulate the system in the favour of your own working life and that of your patients. Okay, and I don't want to hear it can't be done, because it can be done. Okay, good combo. Go and have some lunch. See you in a bit.